They called the police on my wife for changing a lock, but froze when she revealed who she was. The phone rang, late at night. A whisper said the HOA was making their move. And then, flashing lights filled our street. Neighbors peeked from windows. The board stood tall. They thought they had us cornered, but when my wife stepped forward and showed them who she really was, the entire neighborhood froze. And what happened next changed everything. Welcome back to HOA Unit, where every rule has a story, and every street hides a secret. My name is Daniel. I live in a quiet suburb that looks perfect on the outside, but behind the white fences and trimmed lawns, I've seen things that would make you question everything about normal life. I'm just a husband, a father, trying to live in peace, but the HOA never lets peace last for long. And this is one of those stories. The night was heavy. A strange silence hung over the street. Only the sound of the crickets outside and the faint hum of porch lights filled the air. I stood near the window, watching shadows move across perfect lawns. Neighbors pretending to water plants, yet staring, always staring. That's how it was here. In our neighborhood, nothing was private. Not your yard, not your mailbox, not even the locks on your doors. I never wanted trouble. I never wanted fights. All I wanted was peace. But peace was the one thing the HOA never allowed. The board called themselves guardians of the community, but I knew better. They were hunters. They watched us like prey, waiting for the smallest mistake. A lawn cut too short, curtained the wrong shade of white, a car parked an inch off the driveway line. Everything was a reason to strike, and now they found their reason with my wife. A lock, a simple lock. She had changed it earlier that day. Our old cabin lock was jammed, rusty, weak, dangerous. So she took it off and replaced it with a new one. It clicked smooth. It felt safe. It was the sound of security, but to them, it was the sound of rebellion. By evening, the phone calls began. Soft threats, hidden behind fake politeness. We noticed you made a modification. Did you request approval for that? Violations have consequences. Their voices were sugar on the surface, but poison underneath. I wanted to laugh. It was just a lock, a piece of metal on our own door, but deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning, and I was right. The knock came later that night. 3 board members, standing under our porch light. There, smiles sharp as knives, their eyes colder than steel. One of them, the president, tilted her head and whispered, "Why did you change it without permission?" My wife didn't back down. She stood tall, arms crossed, her voice steady as stone. "Because it's my door." That single line lit the fuse. The next morning, a fine slipped into our mailbox. $500, the paper crisp, the words bold. Violation notice. Failure to comply may result in legal action. I tore it up, but I didn't realize they weren't finished. They never were. By noon, a black car slowed in front of our home. Someone sat inside, taking notes. The HOA was watching. They always watched. And then, that night, the flashing lights appeared. Red and blue shadows spread across the lawns. A squad car rolled slowly into the cul-de-sac. Neighbors came out, pretending to check their mail, pretending to walk their dogs. But I saw it in their eyes. They weren't curious. They were entertained. This was a show for them. And we were the stars. The officer stepped out, hand resting on his belt, eyes flicking from me to my wife, to the new lock on the cabin door behind him. The HOA president smirked. She had called them. She wanted a spectacle. Officer cleared his throat. "Sir, we got a report of an unauthorized modification." Unauthorized, that word cut through me like glass. How could a lock on my own home be unauthorized? But the HOA president grinned wider, as if every flashing light, every watching neighbor, Was her victory, her power? My wife didn't move, her face calm. Almost too calm. I wondered if she knew something I didn't, because I could. See it in her eyes. She wasn't afraid. The officer tried again. Mom, is it true you replaced this lock without approval? My wife said nothing, not yet. She reached into her bag. Slowly. The neighbors leaned forward. The board president held her breath. Even I froze in that moment. I wanted to speak. I wanted to stop this circus, but something in my wife's silence told me. Wait, just wait. The whole street felt like it was holding its breath. Every porch light glowing, every eye locked on us. The air so thick with tension, I could almost hear it crack. And then she pulled it out, a small leather case. She flipped it open. And the gold flashed in the streetlight, a badge, not a cheap one, not a security guard patch, but a real badge, federal, undeniable. The officer's face changed instantly. The confidence in his voice broke. His shoulders stiffened. Ma'am, I didn't realize. The HOA president's smirk disappeared. Her mouth hung open, her eyes wide. She looked like a queen stripped of her crown in front of her entire court. The neighbors gasped. Some stepped back, some turned away. The circus had become a funeral for her pride, and I stood there, watching it all unfold, feeling the weight of a war we never asked for. A war that might only just be beginning, because if the HOA hated us before, what would they do now? Now that they knew who my wife really was. And that's the question that kept me awake all night. The question that makes me wonder even now, Dot, if your HOA called the police on you, and your spouse revealed a secret power that no one expected, would your neighbors respect you? Or fear you? What do you think? Respect or fear? Tell me in the comments. The night after the police left, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak of the house, every hum of the air, because I knew. The HOA wasn't finished. They never were. I thought about my neighborhood. This place we chose because it looked safe, peaceful, perfect rows of trimmed lawns, painted fences, all the same shade of white, identical mailboxes standing like soldiers on the surface. It was beautiful, but behind that beauty, there was something rotten. The HOA didn't just write rules. They wrote lives. Everything was controlled, measured, inspected. How tall your grass could grow, what color your curtains could be, even how long a guest's car could sit in your driveway. Too long. And you'd get a warning letter, one more day. And you'd get a fine. And the worst part, people obeyed, not because they respected the rules, but because they feared them. I had seen it happen before. Man down the street planted roses instead of tulips. The board fined him until he ripped them. Out with his own hands, a single mother painted her door blue. She got fined every week until she gave in and painted it beige. And the old man at the corner, he once parked his truck across the line by just a few inches. They threatened to tow it, even though he could barely walk to move it himself. That was the power of the HOA petty rules. Enforced with cruel joy. They said they protected property values, but all I saw was neighbors turned into prisoners. Now it was our turn, all because of a lock. The next morning, I found another letter on our porch. Not just a fine this time, but a warning of escalation. Words written in bold, like they wanted me to feel fear just by reading them. They said they would call for an emergency board meeting to discuss further action. Against you. See, could feel the eyes on me when I walked outside. The man across the street stared from his porch, pretending to sip his coffee, but never blinking. The woman next door turned her head quickly when I looked at her, but I saw the paper in her hand. The notice the board had probably slipped under every door, spreading their version of the story, painting us as criminals, locked criminals by the afternoon. The whispers had started. Neighbors walked by slower than usual. Some stopped just far enough to gossip, but loud enough for me to hear. They broke the rules. Police came last night. Maybe they're dangerous, It was like we were already on trial. And the whole neighborhood was the Uri, tried to ignore it. I tried to keep calm, but my wife, she didn't flinch once. She walked out, head high, as if the entire street wasn't buzzing with rumors about her. She mowed the lawn, waved at the mailman, even smiled at the kids riding bikes. Her calmness made me nervous because I didn't know if it came from confidence or from the storm she was about to unleash that evening. I saw them again. The board gathered at the end of the cul-de-sac, 3 shadows under the street lamp talking, pointing at our house, ... whispering. Their silhouettes looked like vultures, waiting for the right time to strike. I knew they were planning something bigger, because the police, ... the whispers, ... It wasn't enough for them. They wanted to break us, to make an example out of us, so no one else in the neighborhood would ever dare challenge them. But what they didn't know was that my wife wasn't like the others they had crushed before. She had patience, but she also had fire, and when the time came, she was going to show them exactly who they were dealing with that night. We sat at the kitchen table, the letter between us, the one with escalation written like a threat. I looked at her, waiting for her to say something, but she just tapped the paper with her finger and whispered, "They think they hold the power." Then she smiled, a smile that wasn't. Soft ... a smile that was sharp, and in that moment, I knew the HOA had made their biggest mistake, because they had picked the wrong door to knock on, the wrong lock to question, and the wrong woman to challenge. The neighborhood didn't know it yet, but things were about to change, and I couldn't help but wonder, ... in a community built on fear and silence, what happens when one person finally says no? And maybe that's the question I should ask you too. If you lived in a neighborhood where rules ruled your life, would you stay silent to keep the peace? Or would you fight back even if it meant war? Tell me in the comments. What would you choose? The morning came heavy ... The air felt different, like the calm before a storm. I stepped outside with my coffee, and there it was, another letter taped to our door. But this one was different. The paper was thicker ... The words bolder: mandatory meeting tomorrow night. Our case would be discussed in front of the entire board. I stood there, staring at those words. Neighbors walked by slow ... pretending not to look, but I could feel their eyes, watching me hold that letter, watching the next chapter of our punishment unfold. When my wife saw it, she didn't even blink. She folded the paper, slid it across the table, and whispered, almost like she was talking to herself, "They want to fight." Her calmness unnerved me, because I knew what the board was capable of. This wasn't just about rules anymore. This was about control. If they won against us ... they would win against everyone. Fear would spread faster than any rumor that afternoon. The whispers grew louder. I walked down the street to clear my head, but every step felt heavier. Every glance from a neighbor felt sharper. Some looked at me with pity, others with disgust, and a few with fear. One man, a father I had shared beers with at a barbecue just months ago, turned his back when I waved, like I was infected, like breaking a lock rule made me contagious. I wanted to shout, "It's just a lock. It's just a door." But I didn't, because I knew shouting wouldn't change anything in this neighborhood. Perception was stronger than truth. By evening ... the board made their next move. A thick envelope arrived in our mailbox. Inside were photos, pictures of our house taken from the street, the lock, the porch, even our windows angles that made it clear ... Someone had been standing out there for hours, watching us. It wasn't just rules anymore. It was intimidation. I slammed the photos on the table. What is this? Are they spying on us now? But my wife, she just looked at them calmly. She didn't show anger or fear. Instead, she traced her finger over one of the photos and whispered, They're making mistakes. Her words chilled me because I realized she wasn't scared at all. She was studying them like a hunter watching prey, like she was waiting for the perfect moment to strike back that night. I barely slept. Every sound outside felt louder, every shadow longer. The HOA wasn't just an organization. Anymore, they were a presence, a ghost haunting every corner of our home. The next day, the day of the meeting, the tension snapped tighter. We arrived at the clubhouse, a small brick building at the edge of the neighborhood. Inside, the lights were too bright, the air too still, and every chair was filled with neighbors' eyes. Turning as we walked in, some whispering, some glaring, all waiting to see what would happen. At the front of the room sat the board, 3 chairs. 3 faces, the president in the center, her smile stretched thin, but her eyes sharp with victory. She tapped her papers like a judge about to deliver a sentence. "Mr. and Mrs. Daniels," she began, "you have violated Rule 14B, unauthorized modifications to exterior property." Her voice was cold, rehearsed. She read out fines, warnings. Threats. She listed every possible punishment: suspension of community privileges, legal action, even lien on property. I could feel the eyes of the neighbors drilling into me, some nodding in agreement, some shaking their heads, but no one speaking. No one standing with wanted to argue. I wanted to shout that it was just a lock, but before I could, my wife stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't wave her arms. She just looked straight at the board president and said one sentence: "This is harassment." The room went still. Whispers stopped. Chairs creaked. As people leaned forward, the president's smile faltered. For the first time, my wife opened her bag, the same bag from that night with the police. And once again, she pulled out her badge. She placed it on the table, the gold seal glinting under the harsh lights, not waving it, not flaunting it, just letting it sit there. Like silent thunder, the board president's face drained of color. The other members shifted uncomfortably. The whispers in the crowd grew into gasps. My wife leaned forward, her voice low, calm, but every word sharp as glass. "You have crossed the line. You have turned neighbors into prisoners. You called the police over a lock. And now you spy on my home." She paused, The room felt like it was holding its breath, and then she added, "If you continue, it will not be handled in this room, But in court, the silence was deafening. Even the air seemed to stop moving. President tried to speak, but her voice cracked. She stammered about rules, about order, about protecting property values, but no one was listening. All eyes were on my wife. All fear was on the board for the first time. The power had shifted. We walked out of that room, every neighbor's eyes following us, some filled with awe, some with fear, but none with pity anymore. And as we stepped into the night air, I couldn't help but wonder, what scares people more? An HOA with endless rules, or the moment someone finally dares to break them? Tell me in the comments, What do you think is stronger in a community? Fear of rules, or courage to stand against them? When we left that meeting, I thought maybe, just maybe, the war was over. The board had been silenced. The neighbors had seen the truth. The power had shifted. But I was wrong. The HOA doesn't lose quietly. They don't walk away when their control slips, They fight harder, darker. The very next morning, I found something on our lawn, a single envelope, no name, no stamp, just a thin piece of paper inside, typed in bold black letters, "You don't belong here." My stomach turned. This wasn't a fine. This wasn't official. This was personal. A threat. I looked up and down the street. Every house looked the same, peaceful, quiet, but behind those curtains, I knew someone had placed it there. Maybe the board, maybe one of the neighbors. It didn't matter. What mattered was clear. They weren't finished with us. That afternoon. ... The stares got worse. People didn't even bother to hide it anymore. Woman who always jogged past our house slowed down. Eyes locked on me like I was a criminal. The man mowing his lawn stopped the moment I walked outside. Just stood there. Engine still running. Staring it was like the whole street had turned into one giant eye, and that eye was fixed on us. By evening ... Another letter came, this time official. With the HOA letterhead, they were raising the fines, not just for the lock ... but for non-compliance. During the meeting, 500 became 1,000, then another 500 for disrupting community order. I held the paper in my hands. It didn't even feel real anymore, like they were just inventing punishments out of thin air. Because they could. But my wife, she didn't flinch. She sat at the table ... quiet, studying the letter the way a detective studies a suspect. She finally looked at me and whispered, "They're scared." Scared, that word echoed in my head. How could the board, the most feared people in this neighborhood, be scared of us? But maybe she was right. Maybe that's why they were doubling down, because fear makes people desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. The next night, it got worse, much worse. We were eating dinner when the noise started, a loud banging on our trash cans outside. I ran to the window, saw shadows running across our lawn, laughing ... yelling ... and then the sound of glass shattering at the edge of the porch. I ran outside, but by the time I got there, they were gone. Just broken glass on the steps and spray paint on the sidewalk. One word in red: OUT. My chest tightened. This wasn't petty anymore. This was hate. This was Wari wanted to call the police. But my wife stopped me. She placed her hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Not yet." Her calmness scared me because I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't just defending anymore. She was planning, calculating. The board thought they had power, but they didn't know her. Not really. And when she finally moved, it wouldn't just be defense. It would be destruction the next day. The board made their boldest move yet. They called another emergency meeting, but this time, not in the clubhouse. This time, at our house. I opened the door that evening, and there they were, 3 of them, the president in the middle, her face twisted with fake politeness, Mr. and Mrs. Daniels. "We've come to resolve this matter." Resolve. Her voice made the word sound like poison. I stepped aside, against my better judgment, and they walked in like they owned the place. Their eyes scanned everything, every picture on the wall, every corner of the room, as if they were already measuring it for themselves. They sat at our table, pulled out their papers, started listing demands: remove the lock, pay the fines, sign a written apology to the board, or face legal seizure of property. I clenched my fists under the table. Every word felt like a blade cutting deeper into my patience. But my wife, she sat still ... silent, watching them the way a lion watches hyenas. Finally, she spoke calm ... low, deliberate. "You're overstepping." The president laughed, a short, sharp laugh that carried no warmth. "We decide what overstepping is, and that was it. That was." The moment I saw the fire in my wife's eyes ignite, she leaned forward, placed her badge on the table again. But this time, she didn't just show it. She slid it across, right under the president's hand. Her voice sharpened. "You've broken more laws than you enforce. You've turned a community into a prison. And now, you've crossed into harassment ... and intimidation." The room went silent. Board members shifted in their chairs. The president's smile cracked. Her hand trembled as it hovered above the badge. "My wife didn't stop. If this continues, it will not be handled here. It will be handled in federal court." The words hit the room like thunder. The board froze for the first time. They weren't in control. for the first time. They looked like prey. They left soon after. No more demands, no more smirks, just silence when the door closed. The house felt heavier. I knew the fight wasn't over, but something had changed. The power had shifted. The question now was simple: would the board back down quietly? Or would they strike back harder, more desperate, more dangerous, and maybe? That's the question for you too. If people in power tried to crush you, would you fight them head on, or wait and let them destroy themselves with their own greed? Tell me in the comments. Would you attack, or would you wait the night after the board stormed out of our house? I thought maybe it was finished, but deep inside, I knew better. The HOA never stopped, and fear makes desperate people reckless. The silence of the street felt wrong, too heavy, too still, like the whole neighborhood was waiting for something, and it came. Sooner than I expected it. Started with the lights, red and blue, flashing across the windows. The sound of tires on gravel, slow and heavy. I opened the door, and there it was, a squad car, parked right in front of our house. Neighbors came out immediately, pretending to walk their dogs, pretending to grab the mail. But I saw the truth. They wanted to show the board had delivered it to them. 2 officers stepped out, straight faces, firm voices. One of them called out, "Sir, we need to speak with your wife." My chest tightened. It was happening again. The board had pulled the strings, and the police were their puppets. I could feel eyes on me from every direction, curtains twitching, porch lights flickering on. The entire street watching, as if they were at some twisted theater, and we were the main act. My wife walked out slowly, calm, steady, the kind of calm that made my heart race faster, because I knew what she was about to do. The officer cleared his throat. "We received reports of unauthorized modifications, possible violation of community safety." Unauthorized, that word again. It burned every time I heard it. How could a lock, a simple lock, be called a crime? The board president stood at the end of the driveway, her arms crossed, her smirk wide, like a queen watching her enemies dragged before her throne. She whispered something to a neighbor, and they laughed quietly, as if victory was already hers. The officer turned to my wife again. "Ma'am, is it true you replaced this lock without board approval?" The street fell silent. Not even a dog barked. Every neighbor leaned forward. Every breath seemed to stop, waiting for her answer. My wife didn't speak. Not at first. She reached slowly into her bag, the same bag she always carried, the bag that held her weapon. Not a gun, but something far more powerful. The president smirked wider, thinking she had won. But then the leather case snapped open, and the gold glint of her badge caught the flashing lights. The officer's expression changed instantly. His jaw tightened. His voice cracked. "Ma'am, I didn't realize, The second officer stepped back slightly, his eyes wide. The whispers started in the crowd. "What is that, Is she, official, What's going on, My wife spoke finally, her voice sharp, low enough to be calm, but strong enough to cut through the silence. "You've been misled. This is not a police matter. This is harassment." The board president's smirk collapsed. Her face drained of color. She tried to step forward, tried to speak, but no sound came out. The officer cleared his throat, again louder this time, so the entire street could hear. "This is not criminal. This is civil, and it is harassment." He turned toward the president. "Ma'am, you wasted our time tonight." The neighbors gasped. Some shook their heads. Some whispered louder. The queen had lost her crown, and everyone saw it happen. The president stamped. It's a violation. She broke the rules, but her words carried no weight anymore. Not after that badge. Not after that officer's voice cut her down in front of everyone. Police left soon after. No arrests, no citations, just silence, the kind of silence that burns deeper than shouting. Because silence means shame, the board president stormed away. Her followers trailed behind her. The show was over, but the damage was done. Her power ... Broken in front of the people she ruled, we walked back inside, and for the first time in weeks, I felt safe. But not because of the police. Not because of the badge, because I saw it for the first time. The board was afraid. They wanted power. They wanted control ... But fear had shifted, and now it belonged to them that night. I sat by the window, watching the street. The neighbors went inside, one by one. No more whispers, no more laughter. Just quiet houses, and I realized something. This war wasn't just ours anymore. It was bigger. Every neighbor who had been bullied, every family who had been fined, every old man who had been threatened, they had all been watching, and tonight they saw the board lose it, felt like a crack in the wall, a small break in the prison they had built, and through that crack, light was shining. But I also knew something else. The board wouldn't forgive. The president wouldn't forget. And desperate people are the most dangerous. As I closed the blinds and sat back down, one question haunted me ... One I couldn't answer. Not yet. What happens when the people who abuse power finally realize they've lost it? And maybe that's the question I'll ask you too, if you were in my place. Would you press harder to break them completely? Or would you step back and let them crumble on their own? Tell me in the comments. ... Break them. Or let them break themselves after the police left. The street stayed silent for hours, but silence in our neighborhood never lasted. It was only the sound of something bigger building in the dark. I sat by the window long after midnight, watching the shadows, waiting for the next move. Because I knew the board would not accept what happened tonight. Not after being humiliated in front of everyone. Not after losing the one thing they loved most, control. And I was right. The next morning ... The retaliation began first. The letters, stacks of them, violation notices for things that didn't even exist, unapproved landscaping, noise disturbance, unregistered vehicle, each fine bigger than the last, each word printed bold, as if bold ink could break us by noon. The whispers returned. Neighbors walking slower past our house, their eyes darting back and forth, some whispering like we were criminals, others whispering like we were heroes, but none of them speaking out loud. Fear still had them by the throat. That evening, a car rolled slowly past our home. Not just any car, the black sedan, tinted windows, ... and no plates visible. It stopped for a moment, then moved on. But I knew they weren't gone. They were watching later that night. I heard it, the sound of footsteps in the driveway. I rushed to the window, saw a shadow crouched near the mailbox. By the time I opened the door, they were gone, but the mailbox was open, and inside, a single note: "This isn't over." Words were scratched deep into the paper, like anger pressed through the ink. I held it in my hand, ... And for the first time in weeks, ... I felt real fear, because this wasn't just the board anymore. This was personal. This was war. But my wife, she looked at the note, ... and she smiled, a smile sharp as broken glass. They're making mistakes? She whispered again, and I realized ... She wasn't afraid at all. She was waiting for them to go too far. And that's exactly what they did. The next night, they came again. Not the board, not the neighbors, the police this time. 3 cars, lights flashing, engines roaring down our street. Neighbors poured out of their homes, phones in their hands, recording every second. The board president stood tall in the crowd, her smile back, wide as ever. She thought this was it, the final strike. The officers knocked loud on our door, so loud the walls shook, open up. Now, I felt my chest tighten, the kind of fear that makes your blood turn to ice. I looked at my wife, and she nodded slowly, calm, steady, Unshaken, she opened the door. The officers stepped in, not asking, not waiting for permission. They started looking around, flashlights sweeping over the walls, the floor, the lock itself, like hunters searching for proof. One officer said firmly, "We've had multiple reports of illegal modifications, possible tampering with community property." Illegal. That word stabbed deeper than unauthorized ever could. It wasn't just about HOA rules anymore. They were trying to make it a crime. The board had pushed harder, and now the police were their weapon again. But my wife, she didn't flinch. She stepped forward, pulled her badge once more, but this time she didn't just show it. She held it high, her voice strong enough to shake the walls. "I am federal," she said. "You've been manipulated by a neighborhood board with no authority beyond petty fines. Step back, or this becomes obstruction." The room froze. The officers looked at each other, their flashlights lowered, their voices cracked with uncertainty. One of them stammered, "Ma'am, we didn't realize, But she didn't stop. She stepped closer, pointed toward the door. "You've been called here for a lock. A lock. You let them waste your time, misuse your authority, turn you into pawns. If you don't walk out that door right now, I'll make sure your department answers for this." The silence was deafening, and then, slowly, the officers backed down. Their radios crackled, their shoulders dropped, and one by one, they left. No charges, no warnings, nothing. The crowd outside gasped. Neighbors whispered louder than ever. The president's smile cracked again, her face pale in the flashing lights. She tried to argue. She tried to shout that it was still a violation. But no one listened anymore, not after what they had seen. We closed the door. The house shook with silence again. But this silence was different. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't fearful. It was victory. For the first time, I felt it. The board had lost, but victory never comes clean, because in that silence, I knew they would strike again. And next time, it wouldn't be letters. It wouldn't be whispers. It would be something darker. I sat at the table that night, the note still in my hand, the one that said, "This isn't over." And I realized they were right, because this was no longer about a lock. This was about power, and power never surrenders quietly. And that left me with one haunting question. One I'll ask you too, If you knew the people around you were plotting in silence, would you wait for their strike? Or would you strike first? Tell me in the comments. Wait, Or strike first. The street was never the same after that night. 3 police cars pulling away. Neighbors whispering, filming, sharing looks they couldn't hide. The board president, standing frozen in the glow of the sirens, her power slipping through her hands like sand. But peace didn't come easy. The next days were filled with silence. Not ordinary silence, but a heavy kind, the kind that presses against your chest, that makes every creak in the house sound like footsteps, that makes every knock on the door feel like a threat. The board stopped sending letters. No more fines, no more notices. The paper storm that once filled our mailbox ended overnight, but the quiet that replaced it felt worse, because silence from people like them isn't surrender. It's planning. Neighbors treated us differently too. Some nodded when they saw us, a quiet nod, like respect. They couldn't speak aloud. Others turned their backs. Fear still chained them. Fear of the board. Fear of us. And some just stared, as if we were no longer neighbors, but something dangerous living among them. One afternoon, I stepped outside to trim the hedges, and I found him, the old man at the corner, the one they used to torment, for parking his truck across the line. He walked slow, leaning heavy on his cane, but his eyes were sharply stopped near my driveway, looked at me, and whispered, "They've ruled this street too long." Then he smiled, a tired smile, But now, maybe it's different. And he walked on. That moment stayed with me, because for the first time, I realized this fight wasn't just about you. It was about everyone the board had crushed before every neighbor threatened, silenced. They were watching. They were waiting, and now they had seen the board bleed. But the president, she wasn't finished. I saw her one night standing at the end of our street. Her arms crossed her shadow, long under the lamplight. She didn't say a word, didn't need to. Her eyes said it all. This wasn't over. Days turned to weeks, and the silence stretched on. No letters, no knocks, no police. Just waiting, and waiting is its own kind of torture. But my wife, she never lost her calm. She went about her days, reading on the porch, talking to neighbors who dared approach, mowing the lawn with the same steady rhythm. And every time I asked her if she was worried, she only smiled. "They've already lost." She said, "They just don't know it yet." And she was right, because power isn't taken in a single night. It crumbles slowly, like cracks spreading through concrete. And once the cracks show, the collapse is only a matter of time. I started to notice it. Little things. The board president no longer walking with her head high. Her followers no longer standing so close, whispers among neighbors. Not about us anymore, but about them. The fines, the threats, the games. People were finally asking if they had gone too far. If maybe the board was the problem. All along, the turning point came one Saturday morning. The HOA called for a community cleanup. They expected everyone to show. They expected control as usual, but only a handful came. The rest stayed inside, doors closed, curtains drawn, a silent rebellion. The president's face turned red with fury. She shouted about responsibility, about pride in our neighborhood, but her voice carried no weight anymore. No one listened. Her crown was gone that night. Another note appeared in our mailbox, but this one was different. Not typed, not angry handwritten. Shaky, just 3 words. "Thank you both." No name, no address. Just gratitude from someone who had been waiting too long. And in that moment, I realized we hadn't just survived. We had changed something. The board didn't vanish overnight. The president still walked the street, still tried to pretend she was in control. But the fear was gone. Her words fell flat, her letters unread, her smirk hollow. We still lived under their rules, but the rules no longer lived inside us. And that was the real victory, sitting here now, looking out at the same street, the same white fences, the same trimmed lawns. I can still feel the weight of it all, the fear, the anger, the silence, but also the shift, the moment when everything cracked. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it's just one person saying no and refusing to bow. And maybe that's what suburbia really is, a stage where power plays dress themselves as rules, where neighbors turn into guards, where silence becomes survival. But it only takes one spark, one lock, one person to burn the whole script down. And as I sit here, I can't help but ask myself, what would have happened if my wife never changed that lock? Would the board still rule like tyrants? Would neighbors still bow their heads in silence? Would I still believe this place was safe? And maybe that's the question I should ask you too. If one small act of defiance could change your entire community, would you risk it? Would you dare to be the spark? Tell me in the comments, Would you obey? Or would you defy?